Can can you?
Not quite yet. Yes, now we can. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, our paper is a feature survey of mobile assisted language learning apps or MAL. In this case, apps that were designed to somehow learn Kichwa. And well, with the idea of these apps to be like part of a revitalization project to maintain Kichwa and to promote Kichwa among the Kichwa users and also the Ecuadorian population as well. Well, it's everybody actually. And we were working with in this project with Sofia, who was talking before, and myself. We both are professors from Yachay Tech University. So I'm gonna be first like describing the apps, the different apps that we have, if in our purpose is to analyze them and see how effective they are actually for Kichwa revitalization in terms of Kichwa learning. So just to set the context, Kichwa comes from Quechua, and it came to Ecuador during the Inca Empire when they were moving or conquering to the north. Now we have some differences, including in the spelling. Now is with K, as in the past it was with Q. It's due to the new alphabet and somehow the new acceptance of how to structure, how to write the Quichua that is spoken in Ecuador. Right now, Quichua, well, we have, Ecuador is a multicultural country, and there are different indigenous languages present in our country and different nationalities as well. And Quichua has the largest population, so it represents like 800,000 people who belong to this nationality and who somehow has knowledge in Quichua. As previously Sophia explained, there are especially the elders who actually use Quichua, and the use of Quichua has been reduced during the time. Also, Quichua has been recognized as an official language of Ecuador since 2008. So there are some documents like in the Intercultural Bilingual System of Education that are written in Quichua, and they are valid as well. But still, uh, if we compare to the indigenous languages that we have among, in the world, Quichua is in a threat because indigenous people, are using more Spanish in their daily interaction, in their professional life as well, when they talk to each other, even in their families. So they are not using Quichua anymore, or at least the number of the Kichwa speakers has been reduced during the decade. So we had previously in 2010 like 4.8 of Kichwa speakers percent, and compared to the 2022, the number has been reduced. And there is an interesting fact also here that in each family, um, with indigenous people, at least one is losing the language, one of the family members. When we talk about the language, and before we move on into the mobile apps, I would like you to mention that language and culture are always connected because the language is the form of the expression of a culture. Through the language, we can transmit knowledge, and we can also communicate as well. So it's important here to know that language and culture will be always connected. And it is important also to know that for the cosmovision of indigenous people, they are formed by daily interactions with nature because they are agricultures. They somehow celebrate some festivities where they kind of are saying thank you to the different elements that we have in the nature. So also part of the culture is the oral storytelling and mythical narrative that people have and they transmit to the different generations. And all of this somehow we think or we believe that it should be reflected in any type of resources, digital resources, of course, whose purpose are to or to teach the Kichwa. So this somehow should be reflected on that. However, we know that the digital tools, well, I'm going to make a parenthesis here. When we learn English, or when we, as a teacher and myself, I use different international apps. Well, I call international because every people from all the countries, from different countries, can use the apps. Therefore, these apps represent like an international way of communication. They don't necessarily include culture or cosmovision of the people who speak English. So that is not, for example, represented in the international apps, as I said, and that's something that we consider that it's important when we talk about indigenous languages. In a study in the province of Imbabura, where our university is located, uh, it, we found that 64.3% of Quechua speakers in Imbabura use social networks. What it means is that they actually connected through the technology, they are using it constantly, and so this gives an opportunity for app developers to create something or to use this media to preserve the language and to motivate people to learn this language. So our study aims to determine how do we build a good culturally grounded technology or an app that can be relevant for the culture of the Quechua people here in Ecuador. As I said, the majority of MOLs, the mobile assisted language learning or mobile applications for language learning, they are not necessarily they don't include the culture of the people who speak that language. And even though there are some research about this, most of them focus on North America, like Canada, USA, and Australia, because in Australia as well, they're they are they are working really hard to preserve the indigenous languages. So they are also including that in when they create mobile applications to learn a language, an indigenous language. However, we don't find that here in Latin America, so we don't have too many studies that are, intended to measure the effectiveness of a mobile application in terms of cultural relevance, in terms of content, in terms of the languages skills that people can use during or when they use this type of technology. So that's why our study is like the first step to fill this gap, starting with analysis of the Quechua learning apps that are available here in Ecuador. So the research questions that guided our research were the first, what are the features of an indigenous language learning app? And what are the gaps and areas of improvement for Quechua language learning apps? So uh, there are plenty of other studies about apps for languages in general, not necessarily indigenous languages. So after a deep review of the theoretical framework of different studies, we concluded that like the main criteria used was like cultural relevance. In some studies, like in Australia, it was an important criteria to measure or to give an evaluation to apps. The content that is presented in the app, this means that it is appropriate and relevant for people or real, it represents like real context of the use of the language. The content coverage, and how it evolves from basic components of the language, like basic vocabulary and expressions, and how it continues through the different units that an app usually has. Also, the difficulty of the activities, the feedback provided by the application, the assessment, and how many or how are the different interactive activities shown in the application. So that's when we define this criteria to assess the different apps for Kichwa in Ecuador. All of these criteria were assigned 0 if an app doesn't fulfill this criteria, or a 4 if the app fulfills the criteria. Apart, we also established some dichotomous criteria, like basically with an answer of yes and no, giving 0 if it doesn't have it, and 1 if the app has these characteristics, like user interface. Is it easy for the user to use the app? Like anybody can use it, not only young people, but for everybody. If it has an offline access, because we know that some indigenous areas or rural areas here in Ecuador, they don't have necessarily internet connection. So it'd be nice if an app has this feature. Online availability, this means that the apps are in the different stores, like Apple Store or the version of for Android, and the quality of the sound, in case they have sound, of course, the quality of the image, and also if the image is kind of cultural relevant, if it represents actually the culture of the Quechua people. If it is easy to check the progress in the app, the technical support that the people who develop this app provides to the users, and other additional resources, especially for teachers. Why? Because we as teachers of language, in my case, I teach English, it is useful if an app comes with an extra feature for teachers to check progress, to assign activities, and to see how the student is progressing and how much time he or she is devoting to practice the language. So I think that is an important feature that an app for Kichwa also should have. So sorry, in total, like if an app fits with all the criteria, fulfills all the criteria, the highest score would be 35 points. For the methodology, the first thing what we did was to search in the different search engines like Google or Bing with these two terms, Kichwa app and with Kichwa with Q, because some some people still use the Q to refer to Kichwa. We also omitted some outdated versions. We found after this search, we found many results, but most of them were links of apps that were probably available for a moment and they were gone. It was impossible to download the apps. In some cases, the app was still there, or the installer at least, but the problem was that they were not compatible with the current versions of Android or iOS. Then we also filter the results for the purpose of the apps, because with the term Kichwa, there are tons of results, but they are not necessarily applications to learn the language. Some of them refer to the study of Bibles in Kichwa. Some of them refers only to stories in Kichwa, or well, for radios, etc. No? And then, so with at the end of all these filters, we had only 3 apps that were considered like real apps for learning the Quechua language. And then we used the previous rubric to assess these 3 apps. Well, some of the language apps, as I said before, like one that is called Otavalo Rimai, were outdated and incompatible with modern Android, so it was difficult to install. We cannot access them. It was curious that there are plenty of thesis projects where the final result is the develop or the creation of an app. At least they are actually not clear divided in terms of the common European framework, what a level they cover, because sometimes they are only basic vocabulary and not necessarily aligned with the common European framework. And a key finding is, of course, that this indicates that there is a critical lack of long-term sustainability models, sorry, and ongoing maintenance of this type of technology. So the three finalists that we can consider that are apps that we can easily download and somehow learn Kichwa or practice Kichwa, the basics of Kichwa are these three. Aji Kichwa, which the name is also in Kichwa, which would be like good Kichwa. Suma Kichwa Wawa, which translated would be like pretty baby Kichwa. And Guia Kichwa, that all of them provides like basic activities similar to the famous one Duolingo. Somehow they try to adapt the activities uh, probably guided in other apps. The results after applying the survey to these applications are the following. Well, Aji Kichwa, even though the name is in Kichwa, it lacks of cultural relevance in terms of the graphic design. It represents people that are at least what we expect or what we thing, what we are going to find in this type of apps is to find Quechua people dressed traditionally in some context, because language is also sometimes taught in context, and it's not the case of this app. However, these other two apps like Suma Kichwa and Guia Kichwa, they include this part of the culture, not the cultural relevance. In terms of relevant content, it is content that is actually used in a real context. Well, Aji Kichwa has a two, while the others have, in both cases, three. Interactive activities. Well, Aji Kichwa has the basic thing like matching, selecting, and the listening and vocabulary activities mostly, while Suma Kichwa it has a little bit more of activities that are interactive, but here the problem is that the Suma Kichwa is not actually teaching vocabulary and grammar. It's more like a storytelling activity. Of course, it's interactive. Well, Guia Kichwa is scored exactly the same as ID Kichwa. In terms of feedback, that's important when we are learning or when we are using an app to see if we're doing well, if which was the correct answer or the correct option. Well, only Yaji Kichwa has this option, while the others did not. An assessment, like at the end of some units or some exercises, how the student or the user can demonstrate the knowledge or that he or she learned something using the app. Well, Aji Kichwa includes some sort of these activities. Suma Kichwa only one of activity in all its content. And Guia Kichwa, actually not, there's a kind of a review, but not as an assessment itself. These two apps, we can check the progress, but in Guia Kichwa, we can't. And technical assistance in terms of you have problems trying to install, or you like to receive more notifications or to continue with your progress, well, none of them include this. So the main findings, so after all of these, what the scores mean. First, sometimes the apps are strong in terms of pedagogy, They use gamification, which is interactive and good, but it lacks of cultural relevance. Or sometimes the app includes good cultural elements, but the pedagogy or the activities are not appropriate, and they do not include sometimes gamification, which makes like ineffective in terms of learning a language. Yes, it does include many elements of culture, but in its design as a pedagogy or a learning tool would be the term, it was not appropriate. So would in some cases is either one or the other. Most of the apps, they are not aligned with a common European framework. Like you don't have a clear content that defines, well, this is A1, this represents A2, this is only random content with some vocabulary activities and some expressions that we can say that they belong to beginner levels, probably A1 mostly. And there is not a clear path to next levels to develop a real communicative competence in the language, which is important, especially if we, in terms of revitalization, if we want people to not just learn the basic things, but to continue developing their communicative abilities, it would be nice to have more content, more complex activities as the user progress with the app. And as I said, none of the apps provides neither technical support, neither a platform for teachers that can take advantage of this type of technology. In the previous presentation, Sophia was mentioning about the intercultural bilingual education system. Well, they are supposed to teach Kichwa, but we don't have this opportunity for teachers to use this app as tools or some extra resources to enhance Kichwa learning in the school or in the classrooms. So based on this framework, we consider that the teacher role is important and all the apps should provide this opportunity for users and for teachers who are whose job is to teach a language with some resources available, especially technological ones. And this would be like the main goal of any app whose intention is to teach a language, to be a tool not only for users, but also for parents or teachers. So some conclusions after this assessment of the different apps is like, of course, there is a clear gap between the features of these apps and the real needs of this type of languages, indigenous languages, and the needs also of the indigenous people who are who like to have or use this type of technology. And our purpose with this research, with this work, is to provide developers with a clear rubric that can give them an idea on how to structure app for this purpose, for learning the Kichwa. So a future app must, of course, integrate authentic culture with pedagogy, uh, somehow built with long-term sustainability and technical support. This is the main issue because it it demands some expenses and sometimes like in the thesis, for instance, they just created for their thesis and to keep this in the stores, we need money, and that's a big challenge for any type of organizations or any developers if they want to have an app to keep this in the store and keep it working, it demands for some expenses. And we also recommend that the community, teachers, and parents should also be like included as people who can give ideas or who can give some cultural context to the developers in order to create good expressions for the users and good pedagogy in terms of language learning. Well, that was it. I don't know if you have any questions.